Hi guys. Today we're going to be talking about narrative perspective or point of view. This is not grammar. This is rather the goes into the category of analysis and interpretation of literary texts. The narrative perspective is the point of view from which a narrator tells you a story, either his own story or somebody else's story. Most stories are written, not most, almost all. I can't think of any other example. So all stories, there may be some very, very slight and minute inaccuracy in this word and expression, but almost all literary stories are either told from the first person perspective. So this is something like an autobiography or an episode from the narrator's biography, or maybe the majority of literary texts are told from a third person perspective, meaning a narrator tells the story of a third person or third persons. Okay? So the narrator himself is not involved in the action. He is not part of the action. He is not even part of the world of action. He is no character inside the story, but he is an external narrator, meaning outside of the world of action. He more or less looks at the action and the characters from above, right? He is an onlooker in the true sense of the word. Okay? All right. What I just pointed out to you, here is an illustration. The first person narrator is a so-called I narrator. Okay, so he tells you his own story, and if he is a character in the story, of course, he is also a character who takes part in the action, of course, right? Let's forget about the second person because I wouldn't even be able to give you an example of that. I wouldn't know of any story that I've ever read in my 61 years that was told from a second person perspective. Can't think of any. Well, now that I come to think of it, you do have a second person perspective sometimes in letters. When you address a letter to a person who you want to tell how you perceive of that person, how you feel about that person, what you have observed, what you have experienced, then you may keep writing yeah, that would be probably the only genre, even literary genre, where this would be conceivable. Yeah, yeah, okay. In the genre of letters. but not in novels or in short stories or so. No. Let's go back to the more common narrative perspectives. So the first person is the one who tells his own story. I was 15 when... Bop, 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 bop. And then we have a third person narrator who is not part of does not take part in the action. He is an external narrator, meaning he is outside of the story. And here we have two distinctions, more or less. Third person limited narrator has limited insight into his character's frame of mind. An omniscient third person narrator has knowledge about every character's frame of mind and feelings and thoughts and ambiguities. Okay, so omniscient means he knows everything. Limited means he has limited knowledge. Probably has only insight into the protagonist's frame of mind, into his world of feelings, into his ambiguities. All right? Here is another illustration that distinguishes omniscient point of view and limited point of view. Omniscient means somebody who is outside the world of action, looks from above. This looks a bit like a godlike creature or a being, not a creature, but a being that looks down upon the character's world and their action, and he knows how they feel. These two may not know about the other, how they feel, what they think, if they're happy or unhappy, if they are honest or dishonest or so, right? But he knows, and he tells you, so you will be ahead of the characters in terms of what you know about each of these characters, right? And here, a limited perspective is limited to the frame of mind of one character, mostly one. Okay? And the other characters are in some way hidden. We see what they do, or we read, depending on what type of genre it is. We can read and see what they do, what they say, how they behave. Maybe we also learn that they make an ugly face, or that they look furious, lose color, or flush, go crimson, which is a deep shade of red, etc. We may know this because this character, who is our character of identification, may see this lady go berserk and pull a face, right? So what we, the readers, get to know is always filtered through the central character's frame of mind, the protagonist's frame of mind. So here comes a lot of text. You may go through this, and there is also a spelling mistake. Look here. Shouldn't be there. Okay. So the external omniscient narrator is the one who has insight into all characters' minds. Omniscient or omniscient. Omniscient is probably the British or rather British pronunciation variety. Omniscient is probably the all-American or majority American pronunciation. Okay? Then we have an external narrator with limited insight. And insight always goes together with the preposition into. So the external narrator with limited insight has insight into but one, perhaps two characters' minds. Plural plus genitive, inverted comma, okay? And of course, this perspective is also a third-person perspective. So the pronouns to go along are he, she, it, they, their, his, her, its. Okay? Then there is another form of third-person perspective that you find in especially Hemingway's fiction, and that is an impersonal narrator who tells the story as if it were a film. So, he gives you no insight into the characters' minds. He will only tell you what a film camera, for example, would see and hear. Okay? So, you get to know as much about the characters as you can see and hear. And this is real life, because we, in our everyday lives, also listen to people, we look at people, we see what they look like when they say certain things, and we interpret these things. And this is exactly how the impersonal narrator would like to tell you, to tell you a story, and it is your turn to then conclude what type of characters are being described and presented. The impersonal narrator is also a third-person perspective, okay? So, and then, as we mentioned earlier, there is also the first-person perspective, the protagonist, who tells his own story, of course, from the first-person perspective or point of view. And he probably tells you everything that he wants to give away in terms of how he feels, what he thinks, what makes him happy, what makes him unhappy, whether he has ambiguous feelings about certain situations, etc. But, of course, you will learn about the other characters only to the extent that the protagonist will tell you what he hears, what he sees, what he sees them doing, what he sees them looking like, what he hears them saying, and etc. And of course, your impression of the other characters is always filtered through the protagonist's perception and interpretation. And then a last perspective that I would like to introduce you to is the eyewitness. Really, the eyewitness sounds a bit like crime fiction, But no, this is the eyewitness. The technical term is the first person observer. An observer is not the central character of the story. He is, as the word says, observer, an eyewitness, and he tells somebody else's story from his observer perspective. It is an eye perspective, a first person perspective, okay? But he does not tell his own story. He tells the story of somebody who is more important to him, or that he finds very interesting and fascinating. Therefore, he tells that person's story. And of course, the observer always has to be on location, logically. Because if he isn't, he can't observe, he can't be observing actually, and his narrative wouldn't be authentic. So he needs to be on location. There are very few exceptions to this rule. Sometimes, rarely, it happens that he gets authentic evidence, reports from somebody else that he will then pass on to the reader. But that is a literary trick, of course, and rarely used. Mostly authenticity and reliability are created and established by the observer being on location and seeing what is happening, hearing what is being said, and then reporting to you. Okay, so these are the 5 narrative perspectives that I would like to introduce to you. And that's it. Okay, thanks for viewing, thanks for listening to me, and I wish you a beautiful Sunday and stay safe. And we see each other in one of the next videos. Bye-bye.